Ukrainian Marines have shown how Barracuda unmanned boats carrying other drones on board are harassing the enemy on the temporarily occupied Kinburn Spit. The soldiers of the 40th Separate Marine Brigade have released footage that refutes Russian manipulations. The occupiers recently announced that they had detected and destroyed a Ukrainian unmanned boat, the Barracuda. However, our defenders write that the reality turned out to be different. More than one naval drone took part in this operation, and each had different combat modules and tasks. Despite Russian strikes on the boats, most of them successfully reached the area of their mission, approaching enemy positions. Then, for reconnaissance and searching for hidden targets, FPV drones were launched directly from the Barracuda. Thanks to them, camouflaged enemy positions were discovered in the coastal zone and reeds. As soon as the targets were confirmed, strikes were carried out. As a result, enemy positions were destroyed and shelters are burning. The Russians are counting their losses. Aircraft, oil tankers, refineries, and even an Iskander missile system. Several dozen enemy targets in the enemy's rear were struck last night by unmanned systems forces. This was officially reported by SPS Commander Robert Brody, known by the call sign Madhyar, confirming it as always with spectacular footage of the destruction. So, last night in Russia's Taganrog, the birds of the 1st Separate Center carried out a raid on a military airfield, where they precisely attacked two Tu-142s. This is a long-range anti-submarine aircraft based on a strategic bomber. Another rather valuable operational tactical unit for the enemy was hunted down by Ukrainian pilots right at its launch position. This is the Iskander missile system, well known to Ukrainians because it often terrorizes our territories with its strikes. Additional reconnaissance of the Ukrainian strike on the complexes confirmed that the Iskander was destroyed. But even then, our fighters did not stop that night.
The night of May 30th was intense. The freedom-loving Ukrainian SPS drones struck 23 military targets and objects deep within enemy lines throughout the night. The oil refinery was no exception.
Russian oil refining continues to be kept on edge. In Taganrog, drones from the 1st Separate Center attacked the Kurgan-Nafto product oil depot on the shore of the Sea of Azov. At least 2 hits were recorded on a tanker belonging to Russia's Shadow Fleet. In addition, strikes also targeted the local storage tanks. Pilots from the Nemesis Brigade hit another oil terminal in temporarily occupied Feodosia, Crimea. It is noted that the facility is one of the key hubs for supplying fuel and lubricants by sea to the Crimean Peninsula and the temporarily occupied territories in southern Ukraine. As a result of the strike, a fire broke out on the premises.
Putin has once again claimed that the war against Ukraine is supposedly nearing its end, but he explains this not by a willingness for peace, but by asserting that the Russian army is advancing. In other words, the Kremlin is once again trying to portray pressure on Ukraine as a peace process. At the same time, the historical issue has once again flared up in relations between Ukraine and Poland. Karol Nawrocki proposed to strip Volodymyr Zelensky of the Order of the White Eagle because of the naming of an SSO unit in honor of UPA heroes. We will discuss what lies behind these statements and conflicts with Volodymyr Fysenko. Mr. Volodymyr, welcome.
Thank you.
So Putin stated that the war is supposedly nearing its end, but explained this by the situation on the battlefield. How do you interpret this? Is it possible that Putin doesn't know something about the situation at the front?
Well, in reality, the most realistic version, which even Russian commentators and some war correspondents loyal to the Kremlin and supportive of the war are writing about, has surprised even them. This statement by Putin that Russia is advancing, how did he put it? Every single day on all fronts. Well, just a little more and there will be victory. But the reality is completely different, the exact opposite. And this very statement by Putin actually shows that he lives in some kind of parallel reality. And this once again confirms the assumption that Putin's entourage, his advisors, representatives of the Russian general staff, various military commanders, they openly lied to him about the situation at the front. Well, this was already noticeable before with the story around Kupiansk and with some other situations at the front as well. And now it's noticeable as well. Yes, one could assume that in this way Putin wants to reassure Russian society, which is tired of the war. And by the way, it has just started to become apparent in recent months. Well, it actually began last year. But in the last few months, it has become especially noticeable. Russians from Moscow to Tuapse and even to the Urals have started to feel that the war is coming to them, and they don't like it. They don't like the war. They don't want the war to continue, and Putin is trying to reassure them in this way. He promises them both an end to the war and victory. But the good thing is that this, let's say, destroys the illusion that some people had on May 9th when he also said that the war had entered its final phase. That supposedly Putin wants peace, wants to negotiate for peace. Unfortunately, no. And that's why we need to put pressure on Russia, both militarily, with our powerful sanctions on Russian territory, and the international community, Europeans, and especially the United States, need to apply pressure in order to force Russia into real peace negotiations. So far, Putin clearly does not understand the current reality and lives in some kind of illusions. By the way, it seems to me that even the context itself, this meeting that is now taking place in Kazakhstan, well, the Eurasian Economic Union summit is starting, and they need to demonstrate, Putin needs to demonstrate that Russia is powerful, that Russia is supposedly winning, and so on. But his colleagues in this union perfectly understand that there is no real victory there. But nevertheless, Putin creates this fabricated, purely propagandistic reality that pleases him, but does not correspond to reality.
Mr. Volodymyr, I have another hypothesis, but I would like you to either refute it or confirm it. About 2 years ago, we had a segment in which there was a Russian prisoner of war who was asked him, why did you go to fight against Ukraine? And he said, look, we tried, we weren't planning to fight. Personally, I wasn't planning to, just like many of my friends or acquaintances. We were just trying to catch the last train by signing a contract. Because Trump was being elected and Trump said the war will end soon. And we thought we'll sign the contract, quickly take the money, and we won't have to fight. And now, looking at what's happening with the mobilization resources in Russia, don't you think that these statements by Putin about the war will end soon are once again opening the door for those people who will believe him? The war will end soon, we'll catch the last train, sign a contract, take our millions, and we won't have to fight. Isn't Putin, in this way, deceiving his own society in order to increase the mobilization potential?
No, I think the situation here is different. That's what happened 2 years ago. Back then, people didn't so much believe in Putin as there was this widely held belief that, yes, Trump would come to power and the war would quickly end. Moreover, in the Kremlin, they believed it would end on their terms. And many ordinary Russians believed this as well. They believed this in the Kremlin as well. By the way, many people here also hoped that the war would end with Trump. But that didn't turn out to be the case. So it wasn't just about Putin's statements and position. At that time, by the way, Putin was, let's say, rather reserved about it. Even back then, and still now, the Kremlin is somewhat concerned that they themselves played up Trump's popularity in Russia. For them, this has become a separate problem. Now, however, the situation is different after all. I think that nowadays, Russians don't really believe Putin much either. And there are many signs that they are already perceiving his statements more critically, especially if their statements so blatantly contradict the situation at the front, which people can see for themselves. Secondly, regarding mobilization, this topic is now more of a source of fear, and there's a different problem with the contracts. If before, yes, there were many people willing to go for millions, now there's already a problem with those millions. In some regions, the value of these contracts has already been reduced. In some places and in certain units, these millions are either not being paid at all, not paid on time, or there are other issues with the payments. And there are also problems with the death benefits. So in this regard, the situation is no longer so rosy. And now concern is once again growing in Russia, and will probably even fear among many people that, God forbid, there will be a new mass mobilization, because the contract system is no longer working as effectively or as powerfully as it did before. There are not enough people for the Russian army. Even Russian war correspondents and some propagandists admit this.
Understood.